should put down this charter and we should replace it by the lifelong pension. And that's what the Liberals promised in the last election, and that's what they should put in place, not those small measures, but to bring back the lifelong pension. That's one of their major promises, and I hope they won't break it, sir.
There will be 8 minutes remaining for questions and comments after question period. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, despite the promises of openness and transparency from the Liberals, the government is even less transparent than they were under the Stephen Harper Conservatives. The Information Commissioner hit hard yesterday. This government is even more secretive than the Stephen Harper government. We're in the information age, and it's time that Ottawa got with the program. That's the conclusion of the Information Commissioner. This government is hiding more and more things than any other government has ever hidden. Documents that are hidden, that are redacted, requests for information that are ignored. The only thing that the Liberals want to show is Prime Minister's selfies and pictures of the really nice suppers that he has. But when it's time to facilitate access to information, they're not transparent at all. Mr. Speaker, it's not because the Liberal MPs from Quebec are invisible that the entire government is transparent.
The
Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to thank the Minister of Environment for tomorrow's lovely sunny day, a very important day for my riding.
The Girls Scoliosis Support Group of Ottawa will celebrate their 6th annual Walk of Scoliosis Awareness Month. This will support Curvy Girls Scoliosis Support Group, a peer-led support group for teens of all ages who have been diagnosed with scoliosis. De plus, demain aura lieu la marche pour la S.
Also, the ALS Walk will be held tomorrow in many Canadian cities. This is the country's biggest volunteer run fundraiser for ALS, and it will be held at the War Museum. I look forward to joining my honourable colleague for Glengarry, Prescott Russell, as both of us will be leading Team Moral to raise funds and celebrate the hope of a future without ALS.
Take the time to remember our dear friend Moril, and will join me or make a donation to Team Moril. Merci, Monsieur.
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend, a large catfish statue named Muddy the Mudcat will welcome visitors to Dunnville in my beautiful riding of Haldeman, Norfolk for the 43rd annual Mudcat Festival. Named after Dunnville's popular catfish found in the waters of the Grand River, this festival draws in crowds from all over to experience its exciting parade, thrilling midways, and breathtaking fireworks. In fact, for a town of only 6,000 people, this festival attracts 10 times its population. Now this year, the Mudcat Festival will offer new events, such as the Strongman and Strongwoman competitions, Firefighters Street Dance, the first ever Mudcat Marathon, and a special tribute to our veterans. Huge thanks go out to all of the volunteers and businesses who helped make this event possible, especially Margaret and Kimberly Clark. Without you, this festival wouldn't happen.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize a large group of volunteers who, this past weekend, donated their time and energy for a good cause in my riding of Nepean. On Saturday, 7 churches across Nepean and Barhaven took part in the Big Give, a citywide garage sales where all items are free. Hundreds of volunteers came together to spread kindness and generosity in a unified day of giving. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank John Griffith, Anne McGregor, Mark Scarr, Ryan Dawson, Dan Gutter, Daniel Jolong, and the congregations of the Metropolitan Bible Church, Woodvale Pentecostal Church, Good Shepherd Barhaven, Longfields Community Church, Sequoia Community Church, Cedar View Alliance Church, and Bible Way Ministries for giving back to our community and making the Big Give a success once again this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's 150th anniversary is an important opportunity to celebrate Canada's linguistic duality as a key aspect of our collective identity and as a gift for future generations. Despite long wait lists for French immersion programs in Vancouver, the Christy Clark Liberal government and its school board appointee are cutting French immersion enrollment for kindergarten students by 1/4 next year. This will result in 135 fewer spaces, and 5 schools will lose 1 class each. Cela entraînera de la
This is frustrating for parents who want to register their children for this highly popular program. This will also deprive a large number of children from the opportunity to participate in society as bilingual citizens. I call upon the federal government to defend official bilingualism from coast to coast by ensuring that all Canadian students have access to education in both official languages.
David Pontiac.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
In the House to honour the public service legacy of Jack Lang, who served the Pontiac region as Mayor and Councillor of Clarendon for 24 years. He set a high bar for politicians following in his footsteps. Jack worked for many years in the forestry industry at the Smurfit Stone Pulp Mill in Portage du Fort. He was a valued member of the congregation of Shawville's United Church and was a volunteer with the local fire department, the Kinsman Club, the Pontiac Agricultural Society, the Community Hospital Foundation, Minor Hockey Association, among so many others. He was a true ambassador for the Pontiac. I'll never forget how comfortable he made me feel at the Shawville Fair, encouraging me to join in all the activities. Jack had such an open and welcoming manner, behavior that bears the mark of a true leader. To his family, I offer the condolences of an entire region. He represented that which is great about the Pontiac.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On January 17th, 2015, RCMP Constable David Wynn was fatally shot while on duty by a criminal with a lengthy record. Bill S-217 would require criminal history to be considered during a bail hearing. This bill addresses a glaring oversight with 2 simple common-sense changes to the criminal code. There was all-party support in this House for the bill. However, exactly 1 month ago today, members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights adopted a report recommending that Parliament not proceed further with this bill. Police associations across this country, Mr. Speaker, including mine in the city of Saskatoon, are asking all parliamentarians to work across party lines to pass this important legislation. This bill, debated next week, is aimed at protecting our communities, a goal all Canadians.
Honourable Member for Mississauga Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize the Mississauga Lakeshore Constituency Youth Council, an amazing group of young people. Last weekend, they ran a toiletries drive to help the Compass Food Bank in Port Credit. For weeks prior, the Youth Council profiled stories of Compass volunteers and clients on social media to shed light on the need for access to basic necessities such as diapers, shampoo, razors, feminine hygiene products, and toothpaste. The team reached out to businesses, faith-based organizations, schools and libraries, and canvassed neighborhoods to build support for their initiative. Through their hard work, the Compass received over 1,000 pounds of toiletries. I would like to thank Sean, Pernia, Megan, Nolan, Rita, Chris, Jonathan, Cassandra, Ethan, Steph, Hamza, Vlad, Kaylee, Jesse, and AJ for their amazing efforts. A special shout out to Hanan Harp in my constituency office. Her leadership inspired the Youth Council throughout this project. Mr. Speaker, this team made a real difference in our community. I ask all members in this House to join me in recognizing them.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Mr. Speaker, this past week my city honoured the 2,800 Canadian veterans of the war in Afghanistan, 159 of whom paid the supreme sacrifice. More than 400 soldiers came from Hamilton military units. 4 of them lost their lives. The tribute is a permanent monument located at the Warplane Heritage Museum in the form of a LAV-3 armoured vehicle offered through a program by Canada Company. Kevin Ellis and his Northwall Riders Motorcycle Association crowdfunded, without government help, the $40,000 needed to buy the vehicle and arrange its display. Thanks to the dedication of Mr. Ellis and his Northwall Riders and the generosity of Hamiltonians, we dedicated our LAV-3 Afghanistan monument last Saturday with regular reserve and veteran soldiers and hundreds of civilians attending. We're proud of our military in Hamilton, and I encourage every community to follow the lead of a number of Canadian cities who have honored their Afghan veterans.
Bravo. The honourable member for Carleton.
July 1st is the 150th anniversary of the British North American Act, or BNA. The BNA is Canada's DNA. It transformed 650 years of British parliamentary democracy designed for a small island in the old world into a vast new federation in the new one. It needed no high-minded ideals about rights and freedoms because it was understood that Canadians would inherit the great freedoms of the Magna Carta. Freedom from arbitrary arrest and confiscation, freedom from taxation without representation, freedom of speech, belief, and enterprise, jury trials, and elected parliament. As Wilfrid Laurier, our first Franco-Canadian Prime Minister, said, France gave us life, Britain gave us liberty. Let us celebrate these ancient liberties and the prosperity and freedom they have allowed us to enjoy for over a century and a half.
Honourable member for Spadina, Fort York.
Famed intellectual Marshall McLuhan once penned the phrase, "Culture is our business, business is our culture." The noted U of T professor may have written that, but Avi Bennett personified it. This last weekend, Avi Bennett passed away at 89. Avi Bennett may be best known for rescuing the publishing house known as McClelland and Stewart back in 1985. It's the publishing house that first gave Canadians Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro, Michael Ondaatje, first to Canadians, then to the world. When it was on the verge of collapse, Mr. Bennett led the charge to save it. Mr. Bennett made his fortune as a developer, but he made his mark in this country building some of this nation's great cultural institutions. The National Ballet School, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and the Frank Gehry addition to that. York University was led by this great Canadian, great Torontonian. They all benefit from his leadership. He was a quiet giant, and when awarded the Companion of the Order of Canada 2004, was described as one of the great altruists of our time. Our artist, Toronto, this nation will miss you, Abby, but not as much as your family will. You traveled them far, and they will travel with you in their hearts forevermore. Farewell, and thank you.
The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, this spring, the Vancouver Quadra Constituency Youth Council organized a public great debate. It was ably co-chaired by CBC's Chris Brown. And inside the packed Kitsilano neighborhood house, the high school students who had authored the terms of the debate discussed 4 policy issues. 1, should the voting age be lowered? 2, should it be illegal to hold cetaceans in captivity? 3, should the Safe Third Country Agreement be rescinded? And 4th, should university education be free? They pitted themselves against some of the brightest minds in Vancouver in this debate. Professors, lawyers, managers, and even a former Canadian ambassador. And the students won a number of their debates with their poise, their intellectual prowess, and a dynamism that would make everyone in this House proud. Congratulations on the Vancouver Quadra's Constituency Youth Council on a year of hard work. I look forward to sharing your input with our Prime Minister.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, since the Supreme Court of Canada's decision on July 8, 2016, the Jordan decision, too many people accused of criminal acts have been released without charges because of a stay of proceedings. Many victims are living with serious consequences without justice being done for them. Mr. Denis Lissard, who was shot multiple times, is furious because the man accused of shooting him has benefited from the Jordan decision. He demands justice. According to Quebec's Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions, 193 accused have avoided trial. One of the Government of Canada's main roles is to ensure that the justice system works for all Canadians by making sure that there are enough judges at all times to hear cases within a reasonable time frame. The safety of Canadians should be the highest consideration, and their trust in the justice system is an essential condition for our democracy. I join my voice to those of the victims of criminal offences in Quebec for the federal government to proceed immediately with the appointment of 10 additional judges to the Quebec's Superior Court.
Honourable member for Burnaby North Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, wild salmon are the lifeblood of the West Coast. I rise today to celebrate a high-tech art installation coming to Vancouver titled Uninterrupted, which reveals the story of wild Pacific salmon on an unprecedented scale. Beginning June 28th, after dusk, audiences will witness the extraordinary migration of these iconic fish projected across the entirety of the Cambie Street Bridge. At over 1 kilometer in length, this will be one of the largest projections of original cinematography ever attempted. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Ray Hall, a dear friend and local constituent who is a producer for the project. Their team has been working for 3 years to bring the story of Pacific salmon to the heart of Vancouver during the celebration of Canada 150. I look forward to joining the launch and invite everyone to visit this extraordinary installation.
The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize a constituent who was recently elected to lead a national organization. This young Regina Louvain resident has impressed many with his civic engagement and sunny disposition. Mr. Speaker, I cannot name this constituent because he is also a member of this House. I am, of course, congratulating the new Conservative leader. The member for Regina Qu'Appelle is a student of the Westminster system and must be almost as excited as me about the newly elected British Parliament. Let me be the first to congratulate Jeremy Corbyn in the Canadian Parliament. The British Labour Party made significant gains campaigning on a bold, progressive platform. Our sister party's success is an inspiration to the NDP as we choose a new leader to build Canada for the many, not the few.
The honourable member for Cariboo Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, the average rate of suicide within the general public is 11.5 per 100,000 people. The rate of suicide within the first responder community is 56 per 100,000 people. Today, Peel Region paramedics are saying goodbye to one of their own. He was a husband, a father, a friend, a brother. This past week, families, friends, and colleagues said goodbye to first responders from North Battleford, Saskatchewan, from North Vancouver, and in Northern British Columbia. 4 lives cut short because of post-traumatic stress disorder. Mr. Speaker, my bill C-211 comes too late for these families. I hope next week when Bill C-211 enters this House for third reading, that it passes unanimously, because collectively we will send a message that these deaths were not in vain, that we stand together in the fight against PTSD, and that those who are suffering know that they're not alone. To my colleagues, we must be better. We must do better. To the families and friends and colleagues of the fallen, my heart goes out to you, and I'm truly sorry for your loss.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge 3 funding initiatives in my riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South that exemplify the rural renaissance in Eastern Ontario. 23 startup companies are now benefiting from a total investment of almost $700,000. These startups represent the best in Canada's innovation agenda. These funds are targeting the acceleration of promising technology startups. Additionally, $1 million is being allocated to create the Northumberland Venture Fund, with support from the Eastern Ontario Development Program. And finally, the Venture 13 project will allow a dedicated hub for startups with an initial investment of $400,000 through the Federal Collaborative Economic Development Program. This is a shining example of true collaboration. I want to thank Wendy Curtis and her team at the Northumberland Community Futures Development Corporation for having the vision, and our federal government and communities who supported it. We are helping create a brighter future for Eastern Ontario. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member for Carleton.
Yesterday, the Minister of Innovation said, and I quote, "All transactions under the Investment Canada Act are subject to a national security review." We have followed the process. He was referring to Norset, but that company put out a statement saying, quote, "The minister responsible for the Investment Canada Act has served notice that there will be no order for review under of the transaction under the Act." Which is it?
The The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, every single transaction is subject to a national security review. This is a multi-step review process, and the process was followed, Mr. Speaker. We take the advice and feedback from our national security agencies very seriously, and based on that advice, we proceeded with this transaction, Mr. Speaker. I want to reassure this member and this House that we never, ever will compromise our national security.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is the opposite of what the company in question has said in publicly released documents. Furthermore, David Mulroney, Canada's former ambassador to China and a foreign and defence policy advisor to the Prime Minister, Richard Fadden, the former CSIS director, have both raised the alarm bell about the approval of this transaction without appropriate national security review. Why is it that this minister is ignoring Canada's national security experts and putting patented national security technology in the hands of those who cannot be trusted with it?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is that this is a multi-step national security review process which is very rigorous. Did Canada's national security agencies examine this deal? The answer is yes. Did the government follow the security agency's recommendations? The answer is yes. So Canadians can be confident in the knowledge that Canada's security agencies have done their due diligence.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the due diligence necessary comes in Section 25 of the Act, which requires, in instances where national security matters are at stake, that there be a full and complete review, something that the company in question says did not happen. The former ambassador to China on behalf from Canada has said that this is, quote, worrying. The former CSIS director has said there should have been a review. Why did this minister and this government ignore all of these voices before approving this transaction?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, the exact opposite. We did not ignore any voices. We actually followed the advice given to us by our national security agencies. And again, the member opposite knows full well that we followed the process, did our due diligence, did our homework, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to remind the member opposite that all transactions are subject to a national security review, Mr. Speaker. We never have and we never will compromise our national security.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Not too long ago, the Canadians were governed by a responsible government. The Conservative government refused to allow ONET to take over ITF in Montreal for national security reasons. But this irresponsible Liberal government overturned the decision, first of all. And yesterday, we learned through the Globe and Mail that they're allowing another company, Norsad, to proceed without a review. And why is it that the government is playing games with our national security? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with my colleague.
Compromise our national security. And let's be clear with respect to the specific case mentioned by the member opposite on ONET. We did not overturn a cabinet order. The previous government managed the process so poorly that it ended up in court. We have a rigorous process. We examine all the facts by our national security agencies, and the law was followed. Again, Mr. Speaker, the law was followed, and we acted in the full advice given to us by our national security agencies.
The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Well, Mr. Speaker, the problem for the minister is it's not just the Conservatives that have doubts. It's the company as well that said that it didn't subject it to that review, and the former ambassador has also issued reservations. That's not just Conservatives, but should we be surprised with such a soft approach when we know that the current Prime Minister in 2013 said, and I quote, "I have some admiration for China because their dictatorship enables them to undertake a sharp economic change." Does the member for Papineau, can the member for Papineau take national security seriously and act as a responsible leader?
Mr. Speaker, we take national security very seriously. That's why we work very closely with our security agencies, and we take their advice and we follow their advice, Mr. Speaker. But with respect to China and our overall goal in terms of the economy, we've been very clear that we're open to trade, that we're open to investment, that we're open to people. And that's why last month there was 54,000 jobs that were created in our economy. And over the last 8 months, over 250,000 jobs. Good quality, full-time, resilient jobs, Mr. Speaker. That's the bottom line. We want to make sure we advance our economic agenda, grow the economy, and help the middle class.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Innovation told Canadians that the government had conducted a national security review, full stop, of the takeover of a Vancouver high-tech company by a Chinese company. However, that's the opposite of the truth. The minister's trying to pretend that there's a difference between, wait for it, a national security review and the national security review process. The minister's playing cynical word games. This is deceptive, but worst of all, he is misleading Canadians. Weren't the Liberals supposed to be better than this?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to remind the member opposite what I said yesterday and what I said earlier today in question period. All transactions are subject to a national security review. This is a multi-level process, Mr. Speaker. The process was followed. We did our due diligence, we did our homework, and we took the advice. We followed the advice of our national security agencies, Mr. Speaker. We will make sure that we never, ever compromise our national security, our national interest, and at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to focus on growing the economy, creating jobs, and making sure we bring more investments and more opportunities for Canadians.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Magog. Mr. Speaker, the problem this week is that the Liberals refused to conduct a comprehensive review of national security, not just some steps. Now, instead of explaining why they didn't do this in-depth review, yesterday the minister stood up several times to falsely claim that he had done one. Will the Liberal government take responsibility for having refused to conduct this review? Will it stop misleading Canadians? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is that this is a multi-step national security review process, which is very rigorous. And did Canada's national security agencies examine this deal? And as I said before, yes, they did. Did the government follow the security agency's recommendations? As I said before, yes, we did. Canadians can be confident in the knowledge that Canada's security agencies have done their due diligence, Mr. Speaker, and we never have and we never will compromise on national security.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Magog. We learned this morning that the Prime Minister extended the Ethics and Lobbying Commissioner's mandates following the fiasco surrounding the appointment of Madeleine Meilleur. It shows that we need not only a new consultation process, but also time to put in place this process. Will the Liberal government accept to develop a nomination process for senior officials to prevent partisanship in these roles that are of such critical importance? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the importance of officers of Parliament to be accountable to Parliament. The two appointments will be the Lobbying Commissioner and the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. They will ensure the continuity of the leadership and allow us to complete the appointment process. Henceforth, the positions are open and the government has committed to identifying the best qualified candidates for these positions.
Victoria.
These commissioners, Mr. Speaker, work for all Canadians and report to Parliament, not to the government of the day. This is to ensure their independence so they can investigate any government, regardless of their political affiliation. The Liberals attempted to change that tradition for their own partisan benefit, but luckily for our democracy, they failed. So will the Liberal government now accept responsibility for their actions and with humility agree to a new process that would prevent partisan appointments in the future?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we
have put in a new process that is open, transparent, and more accountable so that Canadians can apply for these positions. And when it comes, and we believe in the importance of all positions and all agents of Parliament, and we agree they respond to Parliament, to Canadians. The two interim appointments for the offices of Commissioner of Lobbying and the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner provide leadership, continuity, and allow time for the selection process to be completed. As of today, the selection processes for these two key leadership positions are open, and we are committed to identifying the best candidates for these positions. If members have names that they suggest, I encourage them to go online. Thank you.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, we found out this morning after the Madeleine Mayer debacle, the Prime Minister is relaunching the application process for the Ethics and Lobbying Commissioner. It should be a clear indication to everyone the Prime Minister and his backroom operatives floated the Mayer trial balloon, hoping it would work and that they would simply fill these positions with Liberal Party donors and insiders. Parliament is not a Liberal partisan playground. When will the Prime Minister start a meaningful search to fill these 5 positions that are open, and when will he consult with opposition parties like he's supposed to?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said, we have put in place a new process, an open, transparent, and merit-based process so that Canadians can apply. We recognize the importance of these positions. Exactly what we committed to Canadians, we have delivered on. Under this new process, we have appointed over 150 great Canadians doing the important work that we know that they do. The good news is that this place is no longer a Conservative playground. We believe in nonpartisan appointments. We believe in merit-based appointment process, and that's why we put it into place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, you can bet, Mr. Speaker, that if the Prime Minister was looking for a social media coordinator, that this position would have been filled in a heartbeat. So what has the Prime Minister's been his priority over the last 629 days, if not filling these positions? Cash for Access fundraisers, a taxpayer-funded jet-set lifestyle, sending billions of Canadian tax dollars overseas, Broadway shows, stage photo ops, daytime TV appearances, and severe ethical lapses. When will the Prime Minister put down the selfie stick and get to work by appointing independent, non-partisan officers of Parliament?
Exactly. Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, our priority has been and always will be Canadians, middle-class Canadians and those working hard to join it, and that's exactly why the first thing we did when we took office was to lower taxes on the middle class by increasing taxes on the 1% of wealthiest Canadians. What did the Conservatives do? They voted against it. Mr. Speaker, we have put in a new process, an open, transparent, merit-based process, all available positions that are available or posted online. I encourage Canadians to apply. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Mégantic-Lérable. Cronyism, patronage, shady dealing, cooked-up schemes. What do these words all have in common? The Liberal process for nominations. Now, the government is preparing to appoint a new ethics commissioner, a new official languages commissioner. Will the Prime Minister commit to consulting the opposition? Will they put an end, once and for all, to this political horse trading that seems to reserve appointments for donors to the Liberal Party? The Honourable Government House Leader. We recognize the importance of officers of Parliament in being accountable to Parliament. The two interim appointments for the lobbying and conflict of interest commissioners ensure the continuity of leadership and make it possible to complete the selection processes. Henceforth, the processes for these two key positions are open, and the government will be identifying the best candidates for the positions. The honourable member for Beauport-Côte de Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. One would have to be naive, Mr. Speaker, to believe that Madeleine Mayer withdrew from the process without being urged to do so by the PMO, and that explains some questionable behaviour by the government for the past 3 weeks. The Liberals now have a second opportunity with the upcoming appointments for ethics and official languages. Will the government ensure the House that the next appointments will not be reserved for candidates who are on the Liberal Party's donor list, and that they will consult leaders of the opposition parties before imposing their choices? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have put in place a new, open, transparent merit-based process. Our objective is to identify candidates who are highly qualified and to focus on gender equality and to reflect diversity of Canadians. We acknowledge the importance of officers of Parliament in being accountable to Parliament. The two interim appointments for the lobbying and conflict of interest commissioners will ensure continuity of leadership and enable us to complete the selection process.
Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, the Prime Minister actually said that someone's background shouldn't determine if they are fit to become an officer of Parliament. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's simply wrong. Canadians expect that these positions are filled with people who are competent and independent. No one believes that people giving tens of thousands of dollars to the Liberal Party are independent. Will the Prime Minister learn a lesson here and ensure that the next Ethics Commissioner will not be another partisan Liberal and actually enjoy all party support?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, as we have said, we have put in a new process, an open, transparent, merit-based process where Canadians can apply for available positions that are posted online. And I encourage Canadians to apply. When it comes to political background, we encourage Canadians to be part of the political process. We encourage Canadians to be part of the decisions that we make in this place. We need to hear those perspectives, and that's why the Prime Minister said a political background of an individual is not the only thing that should be looked at. We should look at a merit-based appointment process. We should look at the diversity of our country. We should look at bilingualism and so forth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the lesson learned here, hopefully, is that the Prime Minister shouldn't try again to appoint another partisan Liberal commissioner. No one believes that the Liberal House Leader or anyone else over there will actually consider Canadians who apply for these appointments online. How can Canadians believe that the new appointment process that she brags about is not just the Liberals' newfangled attempt to ensure that they get to appoint the partisan Liberal stalwart that they've always wanted?
Exactly. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the member might be projecting, but when it comes to this government under the leadership of this Prime Minister, we have put in a new process, an open, transparent, merit-based process where available positions are posted online and Canadians can apply. That was part of our commitment and exactly what we delivered. When it comes to our aim, it's always to identify high...
Alors, je demande aux députés de me éclairer, aux autres députés d'écouter à la...
I would like to urge honourable members to listen to the answer without interrupting.
Our aim has always been to identify high-quality candidates who will help to achieve gender parity and truly reflect Canada's diversity. Under our new process, we have made over 150 appointments, of which 60% are women, 13% visible minorities, 10% indigenous.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi, Bay James Nunavik.
Proposal before us to remove gender and other discrimination from the Indian Act. This is one of the many long injustices faced by Indigenous peoples in Canada. And if you guess that with a self-proclaimed feminist Prime Minister, it should be no problem, well, you would be wrong. The Liberal government is arguing that they need more time to consult before acting. I ask the government, Mr. Speaker, is there any other people in this country who need to consult before they can be entitled to their human rights? Because if not, that is racism.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question today. Fighting discrimination is a priority for our government, and ending sexual discrimination against Indigenous women is a priority as well. We are tackling this on two fronts. The first stage is Bill S3. That bill will take an approach to reform the registration, the membership, and citizenship in partnership with Indigenous people. The second step that we've adopted will be to immediately engage in formal consultations with Indigenous groups and those impacted by discriminatory registration.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi, Bay James Nunavik. Mr. Speaker, there's talk of taking discrimination out now. Now, we have a self-proclaimed feminist Prime Minister who said his priority is a nation-to-nation relationship. However, the Liberal government has said it needs more time for consultations before taking action on issues as important as fundamental rights, believe it or not, Mr. Speaker. So I will ask again, if any other group in Canada faced this type of discrimination, would they still be consulting?
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague knows very well that we're committed to ending sexual discrimination against Indigenous women. He also knows, Mr. Speaker, that Bill S3 is necessary to pass in the House of Commons in order to ensure that thousands of people who are currently being denied their rights in Canada will be gaining rights. Mr. Speaker, the government opposite fought Indigenous women on sexual discrimination for years in the courts. Our government, Mr. Speaker, is acting on it. We have withdrawn the appeal submitted by the former government, and we are going to do the right thing.
The honourable member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, an investigation by the Information Commissioner revealed an employee of Shared Services Canada deleted 398 pages of email documents after receiving an ATIP request for documents containing the words Liberal Party. It's a serious offence to destroy documents subject to an ATIP request. Will the Liberal Attorney General recuse herself from the decision to prosecute and avoid an obvious conflict of interest? Yes or no?
The Secretary for Public Services and Procurement.
Mr. Speaker, our government, of course, expects our employees to meet the highest level of ethical behaviour and decision-making as set out by the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector. Shared Services Canada took this situation very seriously, immediately launched an investigation, and of course notified the Information Commissioner. And as is usual, this matter has been now referred to the Attorney General.
The honourable member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, this from the former Executive Director of the Liberal Party. We now know that the Shared Services Canada employee who deleted 398 pages of email documents following an ATIP is a Liberal EDA president. The Elections Act requires the Attorney General to recuse herself from all of these types of conflicts of interest. So for the second time, will the Minister recuse herself from this similar conflict and refer this matter directly to the Director of Public Prosecutions? Yes or no?
Yes. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, the government has acted according to procedure, as informed the employee, and of course informs all employees of their rights and their obligations as public servants. The matter is being dealt with as any other matter would, and we will await the Attorney General's judgment in this matter.
The honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing I know we can all agree on is that the protection of our children should be the highest priority for us as members of Parliament and members of society. Yet, this government seems intent on scrapping a provision that allows law enforcement and parents the ability to protect our kids. When it comes to our children, greater protection is always the best option. So why can't this Liberal government understand this very simple concept?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, of course, public safety, and particularly the protection of children, is our highest priority. And with the honourable gentleman, I'm sure every member of the House agrees with that principle. In fact, the National Sex Offender Registry, which was created in 2004, was fully funded, set up at the time by Public Safety Minister Anne McClellan. It is the key tool for ensuring that high-risk offenders are identified. When a potentially dangerous offender is about to be released from prison, the Correctional Service alerts the police, and if there is a danger, police alert the public. Again, police and communities working together.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, I have 3 children. Many colleagues here have children, and lots of Canadian families are asking the same question we are. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to put in place a public registry for convicted pedophiles? Mr. Speaker, I'll give the Prime Minister a second chance by putting a very simple question. Can he tell us if he will put in place a public sexual predator registry? Yes or no?
Public safety.
Mr. Speaker, the National Sex Offender Registry is already in place. It's been there since 2004, fully funded, fully operative, and working effectively across the country. In the dying days of the previous government, they introduced a piece of legislation that would add an additional database, but they did not set it up, Mr. Speaker, and they did not give 1 penny to fund it.
The honourable member for Salaberry-Surwa. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government just announced with great fanfare an enormous investment in our armed forces. With the wave of a magic wand, they've found $70 billion to buy new weapons, ships and planes. However, without consulting the provinces or offering any funding, the Liberals announced that communities will have to be prepared for marijuana legalization in just 1 year. Meanwhile, thousands of young people continue to receive criminal records that will follow them their entire lives. What's the point of having a youth minister who refuses to stand up for youth, who refuses to invest in education and prevention, who at the same time is leaving them with criminal records for the rest of their lives? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians is the absolute priority of our government. The current approach to cannabis is not working, and it has allowed criminals and organized crime to accumulate huge profits and has not been able to keep cannabis out of the hands of young Canadians. That's why, after consultation with specialists as well as the work done by the working group on cannabis legalization, our government has tabled a bill which will work for all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says the law is the law, but really, it depends on who you know. Since the Liberals were elected, more than 15,000 Canadians have received charges for possession of marijuana, even though the Liberals have promised to legalize the substance. These charges disproportionately affect young people in marginalized communities, people of color, Indigenous people, and the poor. If you come from privilege, as the Prime Minister said, you can make the charges, quote, go away. Why are the Liberals continuing the unfair criminalization of some of the most marginalized groups in our society?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for the question. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians is a top priority for our government. The current approach to cannabis does not work. That's something that my honourable colleague and his party has admitted on numerous occasions, and that's because it has allowed criminals and organized crime to profit, to allow cannabis to remain in the hands of our children. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why, after long and hard work of an independent task force, as well as important debate in this House, we've introduced Bill C-45. We look forward to ongoing debates so that we can keep cannabis out of the hands of our children and out of the profits of our criminal organizations. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Alfred-Belin. Mr. Speaker, in May 2016, the Minister of International Development and La Francophonie launched an ambitious consultation process to renew Canada's international aid policy. During this process, 270 consultations involving 15,000 people were undertaken in 65 countries, including Canada. Can the Minister please update this House concerning the new feminist international aid policy that she unveiled this morning? The Honourable Minister of International Development. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to first thank my colleague from Alfred-Belin for his question. I was very proud this morning to unveil the new international aid policy, a feminist policy for Canada. Now, all of our partners will need to ensure that they are making concrete contributions to gender equality and to strengthening the power of women and girls. I'm convinced, Mr. Speaker, that our new feminist approach will allow us to reduce poverty and inequality for a more inclusive world, a more peaceful world, and a more prosperous world. Thank you.
Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, junior oil and gas companies are disappearing. 17 publicly traded juniors lost in the past 2 years. Meanwhile, multinationals reap the benefits, backing red tape and bad tax hikes like the carbon tax, getting handouts in return. The Liberals claim they support small businesses, but these juniors aren't expected to recover any time soon. Will the Liberals cut the red tape, support small businesses, and finally champion Canadian oil and gas?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our support for the energy sector reflects a balanced approach that ensures the environment is protected and creates good, well-paying jobs for Canadians. After 10 years of inaction by the former Conservative government, we approved pipelines while at the same time protecting our oceans, putting a price on carbon pollution, and working with Indigenous peoples. Our approach will create hundreds of thousands of good, tens of thousands of good jobs across the country and position Canada well to enjoy the economic benefit from an expanded energy sector. Thank you.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Not an answer, Mr. Speaker. The Calgary Herald says Canada's junior oil and gas sector has, quote, shrunk to a shadow of its former self. The Liberals' red tape, delays and reviews are hitting juniors while they're already down. Investors are fleeing and project costs are skyrocketing because of tax hikes and uncertainty. Despite their talk, the Liberals attack small businesses and entrepreneurs. Will the Liberals stop favoring only billionaire CEOs and big multinationals and finally champion Canadian homegrown small businesses?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we actually are supporting small businesses. We are supporting the entrepreneurs as well. That is why we introduced an innovation and skills agenda. This was part of our latest budget, and the focus is really investing in people and talent, particularly those that run our small businesses, Mr. Speaker. We're also making sure they have the latest technologies to be able to compete not only in Canada but globally as well. We're making sure that these small businesses succeed, have the ability to grow, have the ability to scale up, and create good quality jobs. That's why over the past 8 months, over 250,000 full-time, good quality jobs were created in the Canadian economy, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member for Yorkton Milton.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago I asked the Defence Minister what he was going to be doing to care for those who are suffering from mefloquine toxicity. He stated, and I quote, "We need to make sure that the Surgeon General has the appropriate time to do the evidence-based work he is there for." Days later, that study was released and mefloquine was relegated to a drug of last resort. Many of our veterans have testified about suffering life-altering reactions to this drug, and yet the Liberals continue to do nothing. What support is this government going to give to those who were forced to take mefloquine and are suffering the side effects?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government takes seriously the men and the women and the issues they faced from their military service. In fact, any member of the Canadian Armed Forces who is now a veteran who needs services, who can tie their injury to that service, our doors are open. We encourage any one of these members to come forward, work with the 4,000 mental health professionals we work with from coast to coast to coast. We've expanded access to our military family resource centers, and we're investing in a center of excellence on PTSD and mental health issues. Our government is delivering for veterans.
Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, the federal framework on Lyme disease offers no new solutions and no new ideas or hope for Canadians living with this horrible disease. In fact, Lyme disease advocates and experts were left out of the process for developing the final framework. Instead, the Minister of Health developed nothing but an unfocused, scant document. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Health finally agree that her framework fails the very people it's meant to support and commit to finally working with the community to address their needs?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Our government recognizes the impact that Lyme disease has on Canadians and on their families. I was pleased, well, the Minister was pleased to table the federal framework on Lyme in Canada. We were pleased, which clearly sets out the federal government's role in addressing Lyme disease in Canada. We were also pleased to invest $4 million to establish a Lyme disease research network. And I can tell you, I hear them scream, but I've had my own cousin affected by Lyme disease. It's taken years away from her youth, and we know full hand the impact that Lyme has on their families. We take this very seriously, and that framework is what it's all about.
Order. 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 It's not pleasing to have the interruptions. The member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Phoenix fiasco has been dragging on for over a year and a half with no end in sight. And now, just as the summer hiring season begins, we hear that Phoenix backlog has surged by 10%. This is when 5,000 students are expected to get summer jobs with the federal government. What is this government's plan to ensure that all students get the pay they so desperately need? Seems obvious. And how do they expect to retain the best talent for the future if they can't even guarantee a paycheck?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, we're well aware of the many hardships that have been caused by the problems associated with the Phoenix pay system. That is why our government has invested $142 million on top of our earlier initiatives in order to add capacity, in order to process these transactions, and in order to adopt better technologies and have an employee-centric system that will get us to where we need to go. The students are of a particular concern, and we are obviously working very, very hard to ensure that all summer students, indeed all public servants, have a positive experience.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, almost 3 years ago, our producers lost their privileged status under the American Perishable Foods Act, or PACA, and it's been even longer that they've been losing large amounts of money because of government inaction. Now, this issue is in the hands of the Innovation Minister. What a hot potato. Our fruit and vegetable producers are sick of watching the government play ping pong with their industry. When will this government take its responsibilities seriously and commit to implementing a system of protections for our fruit and vegetable producers? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, our government is firmly committed to the success of our fruit and vegetable sector. We are looking at how we can support this important Canadian industry by working on an upcoming strategic framework. We continue to look at all the possible options concerning the payment protections for producers.
And I'll remember for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, next week the Falkland Islands will be on the agenda at the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. In 2013, the people of the Falkland Islands voted nearly unanimously to remain part of the United Kingdom. So representatives from the Falklands were in Ottawa this week seeking reassurance that the Liberals will follow the lead of the Harper government and stand up for their right of self-determination. My question, therefore, is, will the government stand up for the self-determination of the people of the Falkland Islands at next week's General Assembly? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The honourable member for his question, and I am indeed very much looking forward to attending the OAS meeting the week after next. This is a very important organization, and Canada is proud of our membership. We're also very proud of our close connection with the United Kingdom, one of our closest friends in the world. And I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the people of the United Kingdom for having successfully completed their general election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, for the last year and a half, I've been asking the Minister what she'll do to ensure financial transparency for First Nations. In return, I've had platitudes, I've had talk about transparency is important, the Chiefs and I are talking, but nothing has been done. Somehow she says that empowering grassroots band members is paternalistic, to have the same information everyone else has. Mr. Speaker, how much longer do they have to wait?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We fully believe in an open and transparent process of dealing with First Nations. We believe in full accountability for all of those First Nations. There is a process in place at this time where members can obtain the information through their bands in their respected areas. But the government is working towards a new model of transparency and accountability with First Nations and disclosure of expenses and income, and we'll continue to do that in consultation with the Indigenous councils.
Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, again, more platitudes and a lack of transparency for the people that are desperately asking for it. It is unacceptable. The Liberal government chooses to enforce the laws that they want and not the other ones. They have no trouble saying 15,000 youth can go to jail for marijuana possession because that's the law. There is a law on the books. They either need to have the guts to get rid of it or enforce it.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but the government opposite, as the member knows, imposed legislation and policy around transparency and accountability on First Nations. That is not the way we do business. We work in consultation with First Nations. We have been working hard with many Indigenous organizations, including the AFN and the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association, on ways to enhance that mutual accountability we are going to be implementing a process that is in consensus with all involved that will have full accountability and transparency measures.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, all individuals should be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender expression, or gender identity. From appointing the member of Edmonton Senator as the Prime Minister's Special Advisor on LGBTQ issues to introducing Bill C-16, which is currently before the Senate, our government has consistently demonstrated our commitment to the promotion and protection of LGBTQ rights. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs please update this House on the two developments announced yesterday that would globally advance the rights of LGBTQ people globally?
Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank the member from Etobicoke Lakeshore for his question. Yesterday, our government was truly delighted to announce that Canada will be the new co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition. The coalition is made up of more than 30 countries and promotes and protects the human rights of lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, and intersex people globally. This is an important step forward for LGBTQ2 rights internationally, and I'm so proud that Canada is contributing as co-chair, especially in this month when my city is celebrating Pride.
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to cutting critical search and rescue dive program in British Columbia, just as we enter the busiest boating season and tourism season, we learned last week that the Fisheries Minister was quietly planning to close Coast Guard stations throughout Manitoba and Ontario.
Unbelievable.
Why? Well, the Liberals feel this money could be better spent somewhere else. The Liberal government is putting the lives of thousands of Canadians at risk who use our waterways. Will the minister stand in the House right now and reverse this decision?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Coast Guard prioritizes the safety of Canadians above all else. And we can say with confidence that Vancouver Harbour is safer today than it was 2 years ago thanks to the reopening of the Kitsilano Coast Guard and this government's investment in the Oceans Protection Plan. This means an increase in search and rescue personnel over the next 3 years and 4 new lifeboat stations on the West Coast, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we will continue to work closely with our search and rescue partners to ensure all required capabilities are provided to make sure that we keep British Columbians and all Canadians safe.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Having lost my oldest brother Brian to a stroke a few years ago, and as a heart attack survivor myself, my family, like thousands of other Canadian families, have experienced firsthand the awful effects of heart disease and stroke. On Wednesday, the Heart and Stroke Foundation released its 2017 stroke report, which indicates that a number of Canadians living with a stroke could almost double. Could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health inform the House of the government's actions and plans to support those recovering from a stroke and their caregivers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester for his question and for his work on this file.
The impact that a stroke can have on an individual and their family, and that in many cases it's a family member that is taking time off work to help with the recovery. That's why our government is moving forward on our commitment to help Canadians that are supporting the needs of an ill family member by making benefits more inclusive and flexible. These
are changes that are going to make a real difference and which will allow caregivers to keep income and protect their jobs in these difficult times. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government has been in power for 2 years. 2 years where they've announced all kinds of projects and endless spending. 2 years of bragging about working for all the regions of Canada. And yet, we've seen nothing for Quebec City. Nothing for Beauport 2020, nothing for the Pont de Quebec, nothing for the cruise ship terminal, nothing for the INO, nothing for the Nordic Institute, and no minister for Quebec. Are the Liberals, have they ever heard of Quebec City? What's the problem? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, and I've been across Quebec and in Quebec City recently. We have 256 projects underway in Quebec with $2.8 million in investment. We are there for Quebec. We're investing in Quebec. I speak to the mayors of the regions, and they're extremely happy because projects they've been calling for 10 years are coming to fruition. There are people who are literally in tears because they're so happy that these projects that they've needed for their communities are finally coming into fruition. That's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, a week ago, The children of Raif Badawi had a message for the Prime Minister. What they said, quote, was, "It's unfair that our father is in prison. He didn't kill anyone. He just created a blog. Mr. Prime Minister, pick up the phone, call the King of Saudi Arabia so that our father can come home." That was their heartfelt message. Has the Prime Minister called the King of Saudi Arabia to free Raif Badawi as his children have asked?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Consular Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government and myself included have raised the case of Mr. Badawi at the highest level with the Saudi government. We will continue to ask for clemency for Mr. Badawi. We appeal for humanitarian reasons to see Mr. Badawi reunited with his family, and I want to take a moment to commend Mr. Badawi's wife, whom I met several times, for her courage and her strength.
The Honourable Member from Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Foreign Affairs talked this week about great principles. She told us that Canada has to show leadership and that it will. And that's all fine. But what about human rights? How is it that this government can discuss arms deals with the Saudis, but they refuse to discuss human rights with them? If this government wants to be taken seriously, as a serious leader, what's it waiting for to get involved and demand the release of Raif Badawi?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been consistent. Human rights promotion is a pillar of our foreign policy. Everywhere we go, every time we meet with government officials, our ambassadors, our heads of missions around the world are promoting human rights and calling for equal rights to all. Mr. Badawi's case has been important to our government. We will continue to appeal to the Saudi government on humanitarian basis for clemency, so he is reunited with his family.
The Honourable Member from Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Quebec, the Prime Minister's playing good cop, bad cop. After sending Philippe Couillard off to manage his own affairs, now he wants Quebecers to feel more at home in Canada. The last time that a Trudeau started getting involved in playing this game, Quebec ended up in exile. Will the Prime Minister finally respond to the unanimous resolution of the National Assembly, calling on him to respect Quebec's laws and amend Bill C-44? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I am very happy to inform the member that when it comes to Bill C-44 and infrastructure projects in particular, there are projects in the projects that will take place in Quebec and any province will respect the laws of that province, Quebec in particular here, and that will always be the case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. In May, the Auditor General released a report highlighting Transport Canada's failure to show leadership in addressing the infrastructure needs of Nunavut airports. Our airports do not meet Canadian safety standards. They lack safe runways, adequate lighting, vital weather, and navigational aids. I've seen this firsthand because I've been in every airport in Nunavut. It's the only way to access our communities and transport essential goods and services. This is simply unacceptable. Will the Minister commit to taking the lead and address these urgent infrastructure needs? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes the importance of safe air services in the North, and we welcome the Auditor General's report, and we will be collaborating with the territorial governments as well as northern communities and Indigenous groups in order to identify the priorities with respect to northern transportation. I was up in Iqaluit myself last year to talk specifically about that. And as you know, in the 2017 budget, we did identify a National Trade Corridors Fund, and that will specifically also recognize transportation needs in the north of our country, as well as the $2 billion rural and northern infrastructure.
I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of the Honourable Ricardo Miranda, Minister of Culture and Tourism for the province of Alberta. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. Tabling of documents. Pursuant to paragraph 91A of the Parliament of Canada Act, it is my duty to present to the House the annual report of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner in relation to the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons for the fiscal year ended March 31, 2017. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083A, this document is deemed to have been permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. J'ai l'honneur de déposer sur le bureau.
I have the honor of tabling the 2016-2017 annual report pursuant to the Access to Information Act and the Privacy Act of the Auditor General of Canada.
Le document est réputé.
This document is deemed permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Access to Information